All right, here we go. So we are back in Masechet Beitzah, Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. We've been discussing for a while the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel regarding Shamei Chagiga, right? Regarding bringing his which korbanot you can bring on Yom Tov, right? We saw that according to Beit Shammai, you cannot bring well, according to everybody, you don't bring an olat nedava, but even the olat chovad, olat reya, according to Beit Shammai, you don't bring on Yom Tov. According to Beit Hillel, you do, right? When it comes to the shalmei chagiga, the shlamim, everybody says you bring them, but Beit Hillel says you can do smicha as well. Beit Shammai says you can't. And the last thing we saw was that in fact there was a machloket whether Beit Shammai are actually saying you don't do smicha at all, or are they saying no, you do smicha just before Yom Tov? Is the machloket whether you do smicha with this korban, or is the machloket about techef leshchita smicha that you do it just before? Okay, that was the last thing we saw. So if we are on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, so we're about in the final third of the page. תכף לשמיכה שחיטה, בית שמאי אומרים אינו צריך בדין אומרים צריך, ודם כי הייתנה. Okay, we saw that. We won't go through that again. So let's pick it up about 10 lines from the bottom. There's two dots and it says Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, right at the end of the line it says Tanu Rabbanan. Tanu Rabbanan. מעשה בהלל הזקן שהביא עולתו לזרע לסמוך עליה ביום טוב. So this took place that Hillel Azaken came to the Azara on Yom Tov. He brought his korban, he brought his olah, okay, and he was going to do smicha on it on Yom Tov. Now the focus of the story is not the fact that he's doing the smicha, but it's the fact that he's bringing the korban at all. This is the olat ra'iyah. Remember, according to Beit Shammai, this cannot be brought on Yom Tov. So what happens? Right, Hillel gets caught in an ambush of all the Beit Shammai. Right, so now what's he gonna say to them? So it says, "Tanu Rabbanan Maaseh Hillel Hazaken shevi'u Torah Lazara lismoch elav b'Yom Tov chavru alav Talmidei Shammai." Right, Talmidei Shammai Hazaken amru lo ma tiva shel be'imah zol. Say, hey, what are you doing? Everybody knows we're Beit Shammai. Everybody knows you can't bring the korban olah on Yom Tov. So very interesting that Hillel does not just say to them, "Well, look, it's machloket. Your teacher says no, but I say yes." So that's it. Seemingly that answer would not go. So he shina po mipnei hashalom, right? So he says, say, what is this beima? Okay, that's not correct. It was a but by saying that it's a nekeva because an olah has to be a zachar. So he says this is a nekeva. Don't worry, I'm bringing this as a shlamim. It's not an olah, right? Everything's okay, everything's good, even according to your teacher. Kishkesh lem biznava. Ryan starts wagging its tail to show them that it's nekeva. And they went off. Okay, they were satisfied with that answer. They didn't put up too much of a fuss. Okay, so on that day, we see that Beit Shammai were the majority. They were there. They had the upper hand. So when you're the upper hand, it sounds like lehavdil, but it's like when you have in the Knesset, right? You have a vote, and sometimes some people aren't there. They have what's called a kizuz, right? So if there's a chaver Knesset who's sick or he can't be there, he's in sitting shiva, or whatever it is. So the practice, the etiquette is you have a chaver Knesset from the coalition who's not there. So one of the ones from the opposition doesn't vote, right, or vice versa. But it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes they say, "Oh, you're not here. We're going to take advantage. We're the majority. We'll vote. We'll pass whatever we want to pass." So, like I say, lahavdil v'havdalot. I'm not comparing Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel to the Knesset, okay? But yeah, we see. So there was more seemed to be Beit Shammai were the majority. They had the upper hand on that day. So they wanted to establish the halacha like Beit Shammai. ביקשו לקבוע הלכה כמותם. והיה שם זקן אחד מתלמידי שמאי הזקן. Ubava ben Buta Shmo. Okay, one of the Talmidim was there. His name was Bava ben Buta. Shaya Yodea Shelacha Beit Hillel. Okay, this is you see from your intellectual honesty, right? Even though he was from the Beit Shammai, he knew that the halacha was actually meant to be. The halacha was established like Beit Hillel, and therefore Shalach ve'vi called Son Kedar Shebirushalayim. Right, Son Kedar. Rashi points out we're now at the top of Amud Bet. So Rashi points out here that Son Kedar says Me'ulim ayu. This was a very, very choice flock. They brought he sent and they brought all these sheep to the Beit Hamikdash. Ve'midan bazara v'amar kol mi sherotzeh lismoch yavo v'yismoch. And he said, everybody who wants to come and do smicha and bring their korban can do so. Oh, yeah, that is halacha like Beit Hillel. What do you see from here? You see sometimes it takes somebody from the other side, right, to come along and to be able to and to allow that. So then, and therefore, Beit Hillel got the upper hand, and we established halacha like them. And there was nobody who questioned that. There was nobody who challenged that at the end. Okay, so very, very interesting story. That's a very interesting story in the Gemara. I want to share with you a piece from Rav Zilberstein over here in the Chashukei Chemed. Also quite a fascinating question, which he brings. My screen is just frozen. There we go. I'm back. Okay, so let's have a look. The Chashukei Chemed, you remember, is Rav Zilberstein's sefer of Sheilot v'Tshuvot, which are, he goes according to the order of the daf. And anytime he has a tshuva, where he brings a proof or somehow is connected to our sugya, sometimes the connection is very esoteric, but nonetheless, that's what appears. So listen to this question that he brings. You should be able to see it. He says like this, right? Okay, the connection to our sugya is going to be that we had a story about Hillel HaZaken, shina min ha'emet. He changed from the truth in order to maintain shalom. So listen to this. He says, Sheila, Maseh beReuven she'uzman Shabbat Chatan shel Krovo. Okay, Reuven is invited to a Shabbat Chatan, one of his relatives. והנה במהלך סעודת שבת פתח את פקק הפלסטיק של בקבוק המיץ. Okay, he opens a bottle of a carton of juice, opens the plastic, the lid. So פנה אליו שמעון, אחד מן המסובים בהתרעמות. Now, people get very, very worked up. So Shimon gets very worked up at this. He says, איך ייתכן? שתמיד חכם כמוך אינו חושש לחילול שבת. He says, you, Reuven, his brother-in-law, whoever it is, says, you are supposed to be a Talmid Chacham, you're an Avrech, you learn and whatever it is. You're opening plastic bottles on Shabbat. How can you do that? הלא עברת מלאכת מחתך ומלאכת מכה בפטיש. He says it's completely forbidden. It's מלאכת מחתך, it's מכה בפטיש. Okay, there is such an opinion that says there are some people who all their drink bottles are open before Shabbat. Okay. So Shival Reuven benachat. So Reuven answers very, very, very calmly, right? The worst thing to do when somebody gets very angry with you and they sort of lose their temper, right? The worst thing you can do to them is talk back calmly. Then they really lose it, right? So Reuven answers back. He says, "Lama lo tatunoti lekaf zchut? Why can't you judge me favorably? Hatabat shemitachat lapkak lo hayta mechuberet elav." He says, what are you talking about? He says, the reason why, again, those that are machmir, when you have the bottles, when you open, so you have the bottle on top of the lid on top of the bottle, and there's a rim underneath. And the argument is that when you open the lid, so you're separating the lid from the rim, and that's creating a kli, it's makem patish, that's whatever it is. But he says, so Reuven says, what's wrong with you? He says, before Shabbat I opened it, right? You just saw me opening it now. You thought it was connected, and I opened it for the first time, but I actually opened it up before. So then, now the plot thickens. Eshet Reuven, shevchina b'maaseh. So Reuven's wife, who sees this, says to her husband, right, l'chsha lebala, she whispers to him, so Shimon won't hear. She says, הרי אתה יודע היטב, שהפקק אכן היה מחובר, ואיך שיקרת לו. Says, you're a liar, right? You didn't open it before Shabbat, you opened it now. So Shiva Abal, so the answer back says, האמת היא, שהדעות חלוקות בעניין פתיחת בקבוק מסוג שכזה. Okay, Reuven's not such an amaretz after all. He says, no, there's a machloket as to whether you can open such a bottle on Shabbat. אני הקטן, קיבלתי מרבותיי שהדבר מותר. He says, my tradition that I have from my rabbis is that it's allowed. Who קיבל שהדבר אסור? But Shimon's rabbanim say that it's אסור. מאחר ואני מכיר היטב את טבעו של האיש. So he says, since I know Shimon, I know what he's like, היה ברור לי שאילו הייתי משיב לו שאני מקל בדבר, that if I would answer back and say, what are you talking about? You're stringent in this, but I'm lenient. It's מחלוקת בהלכה. That would have been, forget about the Shabbat Chatan, forget about everything that's going on. The rest of the Shabbat would have been an argument in Halacha, about Patels, and Machatech, and Makeh Patish, and it would not have been the Makeh Patish. It would have carried on for a long time. So therefore, he says, לכן, כדי שלא להכעיר את אווירת השמחה, I don't want to ruin the atmosphere of the Shulchan Shabbat, החלטתי לשנות מן האמת. So I decided to tell a fib, tell a white lie, right? To change from the truth. Is that, and the question is asked, יש לשאול האם אכן נהג ובין כהוגן. Is he allowed to do that? So now you all know the connection with our sugya, right? Rav Zilberstein quotes here, Gemara and Beitzah, exactly our case with Hillel HaZaken, right, where he has his Be'eman, the Beit Shammai come along and they say, Mati vashel Be'emazu, and he says, oh, it's not an Olah, it's a Shlamim, which even Hillel, which even Shammai would agree. So then he quotes here Rashi, we didn't see Rashi inside, but he says, Biel Rashi, Me'rov and vetanuto shel Hillel, היה משנה מפני השלום. It's exactly the point. Through his humility, he changed because of he told her it wasn't completely true, right? What some people call a lie, and others call a terminological inexactitude. Okay, but he said that in order for the sake of shalom. ואמירי כתב לעולם יניח אדם מקום לשלום, אפילו מקום שצריך לו לשלום מן האמת ישנה. We see this throughout Parashat HaShavua as well. Obviously, a person has to be very, very careful with this heter, right? And the Gemara says in other places, mutar l'shanot min shalom. This is not a blanket heter to go along lying whenever you want, right? One has to be very, very careful and judicious when using this. But this is the situation. For the sake of shalom, it was allowed. So look at the Meiri. He says, and this is very, very relevant to our times. He says, "Lachen k'sharayla shelakanterin ba'in." Hillel saw they weren't coming to ask him genuinely the question on halacha. They weren't coming to understand. They were just coming to argue. They were looking for a fight. They were looking for an excuse. There used to be people like that. No one in our world today is like that, right? But he saw they were coming looking for a fight. He said he didn't tell the truth. That's בסדר גמור. So he says, הרי לנו שכדי להימנע מוויכוחים וקנטורים, מותר לשנות מן האמת. And therefore, לכן נראה שגם בשאלתנו ראובן היה רשאי לשנות כדי להימלט מקנטוריו של שמעון. So that was fine, and he could have done that in our case. That what Reuven did and didn't get into the whole story. That is fine. Okay, בסדר גמור. So that was an interesting question related to our sugya. Okay, so let's carry on. So we're back in the Gemara. So now the next case is as follows. We are about 5 lines from the top. Tafchet Amud Bet. Right, 5 lines from the top. Says the Gemara, Shuv Maseh b'Talmid Echad m'Talmidei Beit Hillel shevi'u l'Torah l'Zachar l'smoch alea. Okay, apparently, I mean, again, it seems like this was, every Chag, it was, coming along. The Beit Shammai, the Beit Hillel, this brings to mind, I'm sure that many people are familiar with the introduction of the Netziv to Sefer Bereshit. But this is what the Netziv in his Akdama to Sefer Bereshit talks about why it's called Sefer Yashar. And he talks about the fact that in Beit Sheni, the Jewish people were very split apart, very all different sort of factions, and some of those factions were okay, and some of those factions were not okay, a little bit like today. And he says that every time anybody who saw somebody wasn't exactly like them, so they suspected them. They said, "Oh, he's an apikoros." Right? That's the point. We don't know how to manage a debate. We don't know how to manage a dialogue. We don't. There is room in halacha for different opinions. There are certain opinions that are okay, right? We learn Gemara. We know there's machlokot all the time. There are certain opinions that are not okay, that are beyond the pale. But when people decide that anybody whose opinion is not like mine is automatically beyond the pale, so that is very, very bad. And he says ultimately that's what led to, that's why the people were not Yashar. He says the Netziv has a remarkable language over there. He says that the people in Beit Sheni, they were tzaddikim, and they were chasidim, and they were gomlei chasadim, and they did all these things. But they weren't Yesharim. And he says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu sovel tzaddikim sheka'ele. Says the Netziv, Hashem does not want these kind of tzaddikim. He wants people that are, they can be a little bit tolerant of others who don't look exactly like them, who don't wear exactly the same color kippah as them. Okay. In any event, but you see here that there was this ongoing tension between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Every time they came to Azariah, but he's looking around, saying, "Am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing?" We know from the Mishnayot in Yoma It's maybe a little bit of a different period. But we know from the Mishnayot in Yoma, for example, for a long time, that there was this ongoing battle between the Pushim and the Tzdukim, and that the Kohanim Gedolim were coming from the Tzdukim, right? And that the Beit Din would sit with the Kohen Gadol before Yom Kippur, and they would make him take an oath. Because the Tzdukim said when the Kohen Gadol went inside the Kodesh Kodashim, right? I've never understood how if the Kohen Gadol did it right, I mean, many times the Kohen Gadol did die, but I've never understood how, if he was a tzduki and he didn't do things the right way, how he could have even survived the Yom Kippur. In any event, but when he went in and he did the Ktoretz, there was a certain way to do it. Nobody else was watching. He could have done it the way the tzdukim wanted. So it says in the Mishnayot in Yoma, it says they would make him take an oath. And right? They would leave each other. They would both be crying because he would be crying that they suspected him of being a tzduki, and they would be crying that they had to suspect him that he was a tzduki. Okay, this is what it got to ultimately. The atmosphere in the Beit HaMikdash was not so healthy. But yeah, we see, okay, so Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, and everybody's looking over their shoulder. Okay, not such a pleasant situation, but that's what the Gemara seems to say. So it says, "Maaseh b'talmid echad, mitalmidei Beit Hillel shevi'u laTorah l'azara lishmoch aleh." So this was a Talmud from Beit Hillel, and he comes along and he brings his Olah into the Azara, and he's going to do Smicha, and he's going to bring the Korban Olah, and we know that Beit Shammai are very, very opposed to this. Right? So Matz'u Talmid Echad Mitza'ot Talmid Echad Mitalmidei Beit Shammai. Okay, so one of the Talmidim of Beit Shammai found him. Just remember, just a caveat, while we're talking about all of this and the background that I've given, notwithstanding, we know that the Mishnah Navot tells us the Machloket Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai was Machloket L'Shem Shamayim. Okay, so this is not, we assume here there are not ulterior motives involved. But anyway, so Mitzvot Talmid Echad Beit Shammai. Amar lo, ma zo smicha? He said, "What are you doing? What's this smicha?" Right. In other words, we don't do smicha on Yom Tov, right? He's kind of having a go at him. So he answers back. So Amarlo, this time from Beit Hillel says, "Mazo shtika." In other words, why don't you be? You should have been quiet. You should have been quiet. That's you don't need to say anything. Says Rashi, right? So mazo smicha. Rashi top of the page. Shata utzel ismoch v'lavod divrei Beit Shammai v'aloinu chalukim alechem. Saying, how can you do smicha? So he answers him back. Amalo mazo shtika. He says, why are you talking? You should don't say anything. Shaya lecha lishtok ve'encha shotek. So. So a shatko b'nezifa. In other words, this kind of rebuke that he gave him that kept him quiet, ve'alachlo, and he left. So now the Gemara says, what do we learn from the story? Amar Abaye hilkach ha'itzuba merabanan. Shout out for the Sunday morning shiur. Right? People often ask, what does tzuba merabanan mean? That's I think so. It's a phrase, as you can see, that appears. I think it's come up in Beitza before as well, but it's a phrase which appears in the Gemara. Litzrov means to burn something or to be singed. So Tzuba Merabanan is somebody who is burned, who is singed by the words of the sages. That is a Talmid Chacham, a young, aspiring Talmid Chacham is referred to by the Gemara as Tzuba Merabanan, and that is why our books and our shir are named after that. Tzuba for short, but that's what it means. So it says, "Hi Tzuba Merabanan." So if you are basically the Amale Chavrei Milta, so you have a Tzuba Merabanan, you have a young Talmid Chacham who is, and somebody comes along and says something to him. Somebody comes along and insults you, attacks you, right? It gives you rebuke, but maybe not in the appropriate manner. Meaning don't escalate. In other words, don't answer him back with something more. You can answer back with the same thing, but keep it calm. Mimai, where do we learn that from? Right, you see from the story, he said to him, Mazo smicha, he said to him, Mazo shtika. I mean, he kept it at the same, more or less the same level, and that was the end of the story, and everybody went off, and say Shalom al Yisrael. They probably weren't the best of friends, but okay. Next, says the Gemara now at the Tirot. Tanya, Amar lahem Beit Hillel leBeit Shammai. Uma b'makom she'asur le'edyot mutar legavoa, makom she'mutar le'edyot eino din she'mutar legavoa. Okay, we're now continuing. We now have the Braita, which continues the debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai that we saw in the Mishnah. Again, our discussion is about bringing different types of korbanot. Okay, so we know that the Olat Re'iyah That's now our topic. Now we're going to talk about the Olat Re'iyah. We're going to talk about the Shlamim as well. The Olat Re'iyah, which is every male has an obligation to bring on Yom Tov. And it's an olah, as we've discussed many times. Olah means that it is completely burnt on the altar. It's what's called like gavoa. So Beit Hillel say you can bring that on Yom Tov, and Beit Shammai say no. So what the Braita is saying is as follows: Tanya, Amulim Beit Hillel Beit Shammai. So Beit Hillel are now arguing with Beit Shammai, and they say to them the following: Ma b'makom she'asur lehediot mutar legavoa. Okay, so just as when it says here b'makom, it's a bit misleading. It does not mean the place, but it means in the case, right? So in the case where the time where here we're going to be referring to Shabbat. Look at Rashi. Rashi says makom she'asur lehediot. So at a play in a scenario where hediot, meaning a human being, an individual, cannot bring their korban, that's forbidden. Is a Shabbat. She'asur lasot lehediot klum, right? You can't bring any sort of you can't do any sort of melacha for the sake of ochar nefesh, because it's Shabbat. You can't do anything. But mutar lagavoa t'midin musafin. But lagavoa, for the Beit HaMikdash, for Hashem, essentially, you can bring the t'midim, you can bring the musafim, right? The korbanot are called korbani lachmi, reach nechoach. They're referred to in the language of food as well. So it's saying you can't do the ochar nefesh, so to speak, for us, but you can do it for the Beit HaMikdash, because we bring t'midin and musafim on. That's on Shabbat. So he has the kal v'chomer, the Beit Hillel is saying. If Amar and Beit Hillel, the Beit Shammai, if on Shabbat, when it is forbidden for us to do any melacha v'chal nefesh, but we can still bring those korbanot, so makom shemutar lehediot. So in a time when we are permitted, Yom Tov, you're permitted to do melacha for the sake of v'chal nefesh, right? Eino din shemutar legavoa. We will not say a kal v'chomer that you can therefore bring those korbanot as well. That's the argument that Beit Hillel make to Beit Shammai, right? Rashi says, "Makom shemutar lehediot Yom Tov dichtiv hu levado yaseh lachem kol tzad tzorchei achila." Right? Anything you need to do for the sake of achila. So eino din shemutar legavoa, says Rashi, kol tzorchei achila achilat mizbeach. Right? Anything which the mizbeach needs to eat, so to speak. V'afilu olat re'iyah, including the olah. So Beit Shammai answers back. Okay, we're going to see a bit of ping pong here. Beit Shammai answers back, and they say, "Amulem Beit Shammai nidarim unedavot yochichu." They say, "No, you're trying to give me a kal v'chomer, but I'll disprove your kal v'chomer from the case of nidarim and nidavot, right? Voluntary offerings, which we know, because we've discussed at length. According to everybody, you cannot bring on Yom Tov. So shemutar lahediot ve'asur lagavoa." Right. In other words, what we're talking about Yom Tov. You, Beit Hillel, said that Yom Tov should be a kal v'chomer because it's a day which Yom Tov day which is mutar lehediot. So it's true, mutar lehediot on Yom Tov you're allowed to do melacha, but nedarim and nedavot, these korbanot which the mizbeach, so to speak, would benefit from, you can't bring them. And you Beit Hillel agree. So therefore your kal v'chomer doesn't work. Right, sorry, I just lost the place there where yeah. So he says, so Amru lahem Beit Shammai nedarim nedavot yochichu shemutar lehediot v'asur lagavoa. So Amru lahem Beit Hillel answered back, I said, Ma nedarim nedavot she'en kavod lehem zman. So you can't prove from the case of nedarim and nedavot because those have a different characteristic. Those are korbanot. Remember, a person wants to bring a neder on a davar, they can do it any time. There's no fixed time for it. You don't have to bring it on Yom Tov. You can't bring it on Yom Tov, but you can bring it any time that you want. So right. מה נדרים נדבות שאין קבוע להם זמן, תאמר בעולת ראייה שקבוע לה זמן. עולת ראייה is different. That has a fixed time. That has to be brought on Yom Tov. So now Beit Shammai answer back. They say, אמרו להם בית שמאי, אף זו אין קבוע לה זמן. Say it's not true. It's not true that the עולת ראייה has a fixed time in that it's limited to Yom Tov. And everybody will agree on this. Titnan, because we have in the Mishnah in Chagiga that tells us, Mi shelo chag ביום טוב ראשון של חג, חוגג והולך כל הרגל כולו. ויום טוב האחרון של חג. Okay, somebody who did not Chag, I spoke about this the other day between Mincha and Maariv, right? This is why we, strictly speaking, shouldn't say Chag Sameach and Chanukah, because Chag means the word Chag is related to Chagiga. There's a Korban Chagiga. So Mishalo Chag means somebody didn't celebrate. No, somebody didn't bring their Korban Chagiga. Somebody didn't bring their Korban on Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. Chag is referring to Sukkot, but the same would apply by the other Chagim as well. Chogeg volech kol regel kulo. The entire regel is the entire Yom Tov, right, including Chol HaMoed, is Tashlumim for the first day. The Yom Tov Acharon Shel Chag. And the last day as well, Shmini Atzeret. That's part of the whole discussion, whether Shmini Atzeret is part of the festival of Sukkot, or is it its own festival, right? Shmini Regel Bifnei Atzmo, for 6 different inyanim. But in any event, so Beit Shammai says, you can't tell me that you have to bring it on Yom Tov, because if you didn't bring it on Yom Tov, you can bring it later on. You can bring it the whole week. By the way, this din of Tashlumin applies. So Sukkot it's obvious, Pesach it's obvious, but Shavuot as well, for a whole extra week afterwards. And that's why all we have left of that nowadays is that we don't say Tachnun. Right? We don't say Tachnun for the week after Shavuot. People always... Yesterday, somebody told me that, I won't say where. They say they grew up in a certain town, and only when they finished high school and they came to yeshiva in Yerushalayim, they discovered there's such a thing as tachanun and mincha. They never knew. Nobody where they were. Nobody ever said it.
But the Hasidim don't do it.
That's
Hasidim
right.
don't say tachanun ever.
That's right. So I asked him where he used to have a mincha on Yom Ha'atzmaut, because that they normally among fit that in. But okay, so. But in any event, so it says Beit Shammai, so don't tell me that it's got a Zman Kavua, because you can bring it the whole week afterwards. So Amru Lehem Beit Hillel, Av Zo Kavua Lazman. Okay, but Hillel say, yeah, okay, but you still have a fixed time, meaning all of this is that if you weren't able to bring it then, you have the Tashlumin, but there's still a limitation within that week. So therefore, it really is the time. And he says that Nan, we have the Mishnah that teaches, Aval HaLeged V'lo Chag, in other words, if the whole Yom Tov passed and you did not bring your korban, so it's lost. It's not like an ordinary neder. You have to bring it. You didn't bring it. You brought it. You didn't bring it. You have to find the time to bring it. Yeah, okay. The time passed and it's over. You've lost out. But it has a fixed time. So Amru Lehem Beit Shammai, v'alo kvar ne'emar lachem v'lo lagavoa. Okay, at this point we start resorting to the limud from the psukim. Okay, so Beit Shammai says, doesn't it say in the pasuk, it says lachem, right? Lachem means lachem v'lo lagavoa. In other words, you aren't able to bring these korbanot. You can't bring the olah. Mulem Beit Hillel v'lo kvar ne'emar lashem. Okay, but in the pasuk it says lashem, kol de lashem. Okay, so anything that is for Hashem, I the olah, you can bring. So imken matamud lomar lachem. Okay, we're going to see a little bit later on. The Gemara is going to learn a lot from this limud of. But if Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai understood that the fact that pasuk says lachem, that's limiting the korbanot, which Beit Hillel actually allow. So what do Beit Hillel learn from the fact that it says lachem? It says lachem velo lakutim, lachem velo leklavim. In other words, this pasuk lachem is related to the from the pasuk talking about ochel nefesh, and we'll see later on. The Gemara will discuss it more fully that the ochel nefesh, which can be done, cooking it can be done on Shabbat, is lachem. It's for you. It's for somebody who's part on Yom Tov. Excuse me, you can't cook on Shabbat, but it's part of those who are part of the mitzvah of Yom Tov. So for klavim, so for your animals, etc., you cannot cook food for your animals on Yom Tov. They are not part of that. Lehavdil, right? Lachem v'lo lakutim, for kutim or non-Jews who are not part of the mitzvah of Yom Tov. So you can't cook for them on Yom Tov either. Okay, but the Gemara is going to discuss that a little bit later on. I think it's on Daf Kaf Bet. All right, Ad Kan, everybody have a wonderful day, and see you later. And if not, I'll see you tomorrow.
God willing. Good luck.
Thank you.
Specifically, the writers meats, which is a voluntary drink, if you want to call. What happens if you have a bottle of wine that you have to make kiddush?
What?
Remember before when you